Young woman saves boy in river, not knowing he's the heir to an empire that could change her life forever. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon as Emily crossed the old wooden bridge connecting her family's farm to the house where she had lived since childhood. Her steps were heavy after another exhausting day of work, but there was a special satisfaction in her aching back. The harvest promised to be good this year, despite the difficulties they faced. The orange sky reflected in the choppy waters of Stone Creek, which was running stronger than usual due to the intense rains of recent days. Emily paused for a moment, resting her basket of tools on the bridge railing, allowing herself a few seconds of contemplation. The sound of water had always had a calming effect on her, reminding her of the days of her childhood when she used to play on the riverbanks with the other children from the area. It was then that something unusual caught her attention. At first, it looked like just another log being carried by the current, but there was something different about its movement. Her heart raced when she finally understood what she was seeing. It was a person being dragged by the water. Without thinking twice, Emily dropped the basket and ran to the river's edge, her work boots sinking into the mud as she descended the steep bank. "Help! Someone help me!" she shouted, more out of instinct than hope of being heard. The nearest house was almost a mile away. The body was rapidly approaching where she stood. Emily grabbed onto an exposed root and leaned as far as she could over the water, her muscles trembling with the effort. When the man passed by her, Emily managed to grab his shirt. The weight almost pulled her into the water, but years of farm work had given her enough strength. With a superhuman effort, she managed to pull him to the shore. He was unconscious, but breathing. His pale face had a cut on the forehead, and his fine soaked clothes revealed that he wasn't someone from the area. Emily quickly examined the man. He appeared to be around 30 years old, with dark hair and delicate features that contrasted with his athletic physique. His hands, without calluses or marks of heavy work, confirmed his urban origin. What would someone like that be doing in this remote part of the countryside? There was no time for speculation. The sun was setting, and the temperature was starting to drop. Emily knew she needed to act fast. With difficulty, she managed to lift the man and began dragging him towards her house. With each step, she felt his weight increase, but she couldn't stop. If this story interested you, watch until the end and subscribe to the channel to receive all our exciting stories. Continuing. "Mum, Mum!" she shouted as soon as she spotted the simple house where she lived. Mrs. Thompson, a woman in her early 50s, appeared at the kitchen door, dropping the plate she was drying when she saw her daughter carrying an unconscious man. "Good heavens, Emily, what happened?" "I'll explain later, Mom. Help me get him inside." Together, mother and daughter managed to carry the stranger into the living room, improvising a bed with the old mattress they kept in the back room. Mrs. Thompson, who was well versed in the medicinal properties of local plants, immediately began preparing an herbal compress for the man's forehead wound, while Emily looked for towels and dry clothes. As they tended to him, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was something familiar about his face. It was as if she had seen him before, somewhere distant in her memories. But where? Her life had always been here between the house and the farm, with rare visits to the nearest town. The man began to move slightly, his eyelids trembling before opening, revealing disoriented green eyes. He tried to sit up, but Emily prevented him with a gentle gesture. "Easy, you're safe now," she said, her voice conveying a calmness she didn't feel. "What's your name?" He looked at her for a few moments as if he needed to process the question. "Nathan," he finally answered, his voice hoarse. Where am I?" "You're in my house. I found you in the river. Do you remember what happened?" Nathan furrowed his brow, seeming to make an effort to remember. I was driving. A car was following me." He stopped, bringing his hand to his head. "After that, I don't remember anything else." Emily and Mrs. Thompson exchanged worried looks. Who was this man and why was he being pursued? But before they could ask more questions, Nathan lost consciousness again, leaving in the air a mystery that would be just the beginning of a story that would forever change the lives of everyone in that house. The days that followed were ones full of adaptation and mystery. Nathan recovered slowly, and each time he woke up, new fragments of memory emerged, like loose pieces of a puzzle that refused to form a complete picture. Emily spent every free moment by his side, torn between curiosity about his past and an inexplicable sense of familiarity that grew with each conversation. On a particularly hot afternoon, as Emily was changing the bandage on his forehead, Nathan finally began to talk more about himself, his green eyes fixed on a distant point through the window, as if seeking courage in the mountains that rose on the horizon. "I shouldn't be here," he said, his voice laden with a mixture of guilt and relief. "There are people looking for me, people who won't give up easily." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, but kept her hands steady as she finished the bandage. "Who are these people, Nathan?" He hesitated, running his fingers through his still damp hair from the bath. "My family, or at least the people who claim to be my family. Was it part of something I never wanted to be?" The way he spoke, carefully choosing each word, awakened in Emily an old memory, still hazy. She had known someone like this before, someone who also talked about escaping an imposed destiny. "You remind me of someone," she said, sitting on the edge of the makeshift bed. "So a long time ago, when I was a child, I met a boy who spent a few weeks at the Wilson farm next door. He also talked about not wanting to follow the path that had been laid out for him." Nathan looked at her with renewed intensity, something in his eyes subtly changing. "The Wilson farm, with the old yellow mansion?" Emily nodded, feeling her heart race. "Yes, exactly. The mansion with the blue windows and that huge porch." "Where there was a wooden swing," Nathan completed, his voice trembling slightly. "And a girl who was always barefoot, with her hair full of wildflowers." The silence that followed was charged with recognition. Emily brought her hand to her mouth, her memories finally falling into place like a river meeting the sea. "It was you," she whispered. "You were that boy." Nathan smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And you were the flower girl. Emily. How could I forget? You were the only person who understood me that summer." The memories now flowed, like a flood after decades of drought. Emily remembered the afternoons they spent together, the stories he told about the big city, his dreams of freedom. Nathan was the son of an important family that used to visit the Wilsons during vacations. Even then, he talked about not wanting to take over the family business, about his desire to choose his own path. "You said that one day you would run away," Emily murmured, lost in memories. "That you would find a place where you could be yourself. And you promised you would hide me if I needed," Nathan completed, his eyes meeting hers. "It seems destiny has a peculiar sense of humor." Mrs. Thompson, who was observing the scene from the kitchen door, discreetly wiped away a tear. She also remembered that summer, how her daughter had been sad when the city boy left. Now he was back, no longer as the dreamy boy, but as a man fleeing from his past. "Why are you running now, Nathan?" Emily asked softly, noticing how he tensed his shoulders at the question. "Because I finally had the courage to do what I should have done years ago," he answered, his voice taking on a deeper tone. "But this time, it's not just about me. There's much more at stake now." Emily wanted to ask more questions, but something in Nathan's look stopped her. There was pain there, a deep pain that went beyond the wound on his forehead. She knew that look well. It was the same one she saw in the mirror since her father had left, leaving them with an indebted farm and shattered dreams. "You're safe here," she finally said, placing her hand on his. "For as long as you need." Nathan intertwined his fingers with hers, and for a moment, they both went back to being those children of summers past, sharing secrets and promises under the country sky. But now they were adults, and the secrets they carried had enough weight to change not just their lives, but the entire world around them. Outside, the wind blew through the leaves of the trees, carrying with it the harbinger of changes that neither of them could predict. Emily's farm stretched as far as the eye could see, green and prosperous, unaware that it would soon become the battlefield of a silent war between past and future, between duty and desire, between love and power. The news that a stranger was staying at Mrs. Thompson's house didn't take long to spread through the region. In a small community like that, secrets had a short life, and soon the neighbors began to ask questions. Emily dodged the interrogations as best she could, but she knew she wouldn't be able to maintain the mystery for long. Nathan could now walk around the house, although he still felt occasional pains. One morning, as they were having coffee on the porch, he finally decided to reveal the whole truth to Emily and Mrs. Thompson. His expression was heavy, as if each word weighed a ton. "My full name is Nathan Prescott," he began, observing how the eyes of the two women widened at recognizing the surname. "Yes, those Prescotts. My father, William Prescott, built one of the largest business empires in the country." Mrs. Thompson brought her hand to her chest. "Goodness, the Prescotts of the coffee trade, of exports, and hotels, shopping centers, and dozens of other businesses," Nathan completed, his voice bitter. "An empire built on unbridled ambition and strategic relationships. My father always said that every business decision is like a chess move. You need to always be 3 moves ahead of your opponents." Emily listened attentively, beginning to understand why that boy from her childhood summers had always seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. "And you were supposed to take over all of this? That's what they expected of me. The only son, the perfect heir." Nathan stood up, walking to the porch railing. "From a young age, I was prepared for this. Etiquette lessons, languages, business, administration. Every minute of my life was planned to turn me into an exact copy of my father." "But you never wanted that," Emily stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "No," he answered, turning to face her. "I wanted to create, not destroy. I wanted to build something meaningful, something that didn't involve stepping on others. My father, he has a particular way of doing business. For him, the end always justifies the means." Mrs. Thompson poured more coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "And that's why you ran away?" Nathan let out a heavy sigh. "Partially. The last straw was when I discovered his plans for the region. The Prescott Empire is expanding, buying lands, farm, but not in the conventional way." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "He finds properties that interest him and creates difficulties for the owners. Problems with suppliers, issues with licenses, mysterious accidents. When the situation becomes unsustainable, he appears offering to buy everything for a fraction of the real value." "My God!" exclaimed Mrs. Thompson, letting the cup fall on the saucer with a sharp tinkle. "When I discovered that the next target region would be this one, I couldn't stand by," Nathan continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "I tried to argue with him, show that there were other paths. But William Prescott doesn't accept being contradicted, so I took some compromising documents and ran." Emily stood up abruptly. "The documents were with you when the car that was following me forced me off the road," Nathan completed. "Yes, but I managed to hide them before losing consciousness. They're in a safe place." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Emily looked at the farm that stretched beyond the porch, the land her family had cultivated for generations. Now she understood why some neighbors had started facing inexplicable problems in recent months. "Does your father know you're here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Not yet," Nathan answered, approaching her. "But it's a matter of time. He has eyes everywhere, and when he finds out—" He stopped, unable to complete the sentence. Emily turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with iron determination. "When he finds out, we'll be prepared. This land, this life we've built here, I won't let anyone destroy it." Nathan tried to argue, but something in Emily's posture stopped him. She was no longer the barefoot girl with flowers in her hair. She was a strong, determined woman who had faced her own battles to keep the farm running after her father's departure. "I can't involve you in this," he finally said. "I've caused enough problems already." "You haven't caused anything," Emily responded firmly. "Your father and people like him create this kind of situation. And sometimes, Nathan, the only way to face an empire is having the courage to stand up against it." Mrs. Thompson, who had been observing the scene in silence, stood up and began collecting the cups. "I'll make more coffee," she said simply. "It seems we're going to need it to plan our next steps." On the other side of the farm, a sleek black car discreetly stopped on the dirt road. The driver made a quick call. "Mr. Prescott, we've found him?" The first signs that something was wrong began subtly. On Monday, the usual seed supplier called cancelling the order Emily had placed, citing stock problems. On Wednesday, The bank sent a letter informing that they would need to reassess the loan for the next harvest. On Saturday, 3 of the farm's oldest workers didn't show up, sending vague excuses through their families. Emily observed each event with a growing knot in her stomach. Sitting at the kitchen table, she spread bills and documents while trying to find a solution. Nathan, who in recent days had become a constant presence in her life, remained silent by her side, his face a mask of guilt and concern. "It's not your fault," Emily finally said, as if reading his thoughts. "All of this, these are your father's tactics, aren't they?" Nathan nodded slowly. "This is how it begins. Small problems that accumulate until they become an impossible avalanche to contain." "But why now?" Mrs. Thompson asked from the sink, where she was washing dishes with more force than necessary. "Why our land?" "It's not just your land," Nathan explained, pulling out a map of the region he had drawn. "Look here, all these properties," he pointed to several marked areas, "form a strategic corridor. My father discovered that there are plans for a new federal highway passing through here. Whoever controls these lands will control all the agricultural production flow in the region," Emily completed, finally understanding the magnitude of the situation. The sound of a car approaching interrupted the conversation. Through the kitchen window, they saw a luxurious vehicle parking in front of the house. A tall man, wearing an impeccable suit despite the heat, got out of the passenger seat. "William," Nathan murmured, his voice barely containing the tremor. Emily felt her heart race. The man approaching the house carried with him an almost palpable aura of power. His steps were measured, calculated, as if each movement was part of a rehearsed choreography. "Stay here," Nathan said, standing up. "I'll deal with him." "No," Emily stopped him, holding his arm. "This is my house. We deal with him." William Prescott didn't wait to be invited in. When he knocked on the door, his smile was as artificial as the shine of his Italian shoes. Emily opened it, standing firm despite her nervousness. "Miss Emily, I presume," he said, his voice as smooth as velvet hiding blades. "I'm William Prescott. I believe you have something that belongs to me." "My son is not a property, William." Nathan appeared behind Emily, his presence providing a strength she didn't know she needed. William's smile faltered for an instant. "Nathan, you've always had an exaggerated sense of drama. This little adventure of yours has gone far enough. It's time to come home." "This is my home now," Nathan responded with a firmness that surprised everyone, including himself. William laughed, a humorless sound. "This property?" He gestured around with disdain. "Please, son, you don't belong in this place. You're a Prescott. He belongs where he chooses to belong," Emily intervened, her voice calm but determined. "And you don't have the right to try to destroy people's lives just because you can't control your son." William's face hardened, all pretense of cordiality disappearing. "Miss Emily, you clearly don't understand who you're dealing with. I could end this farm with a single phone call, and I could release all the documents that prove your illegal methods with a single email," Nathan retorted, taking a step forward. "So maybe it's you who doesn't understand the situation, Dad." A heavy silence fell over the room. William studied his son for long moments, as if seeing him for the first time. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its threatening tone, replaced by something that could be interpreted as reluctant respect. "You really think you can win this game, Nathan?" "It's not a game, Dad. It's my life. It's the lives of these people, and yes, I intend to fight for them." William adjusted his tie, a gesture that Emily noticed was a nervous tick. "Very well. You want to play? Let's play. But remember, I taught you all the rules." Turning on his heels, he walked back to the car. Before getting in, he turned one last time. "Oh, Miss Emily, I suggest you check your irrigation system tomorrow. I heard there might be some technical problems." When the car disappeared on the dirt road, leaving only a cloud of dust, Emily, Nathan, and Mrs. Thompson remained silent, each absorbing the weight of what had just happened. The war that Nathan had so feared had officially begun, and now there was no turning back. The morning after William's visit, Emily woke up before the sun rose. Her worries hadn't let her sleep well, and she knew she needed to check the irrigation system. The veiled threat from Nathan's father weighed on her mind as she walked through the farm, the weak light of dawn barely illuminating her path. Nathan found her near the main reservoir, her boots already muddy. He had insisted on helping with farm tasks since he began to recover, and Emily noticed that manual labor seemed to bring him a peace he had never found in the corporate world. "Found anything?" he asked, approaching with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Emily gratefully accepted one of the mugs. "Not yet, but I know my father. He never made a threat without following through. We need to check every inch of the piping." They worked side by side for hours, methodically inspecting every part of the system. The sun was already high when Nathan let out an exclamation. "Emily, come see this." She ran to where he was, crouched near one of the main valves. There were clear signs of tampering, and a dark substance was accumulating inside the pipe. "Oil," Nathan murmured, his face contorted in an expression of disgust. "They put oil in the system. If we had turned on the irrigation, the entire crop would have been contaminated," Emily completed, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "How could he? How can your own father be so ruthless?" Nathan completed, standing up. "That's how he built the Prescott empire. Every obstacle is just something to be removed, no matter the human cost." Emily observed the man in front of her, seeing the pain in his eyes. It must have been difficult growing up like that. "You have no idea," he replied, leaning against a nearby tree. "You know what my first birthday present I remember was? A set of company stocks. I was 5 years old and could barely read, but my father made me memorize the stock market numbers." Something in the vulnerability of that moment made Emily approach, gently touching his arm. "And your mother?" Nathan closed his eyes for a moment. "Sarah Prescott is an extraordinary woman. She tried to protect me as best she could, but ended up being swallowed by the same system. Today she manages the charity wing of the empire, trying to compensate somehow for the trail my father leaves." "That's why you were so determined to expose the documents," Emily realized. "It wasn't just for you. It was for everyone who has been harmed," he confirmed, turning to face her, "including people like you and your mother who just want to live in peace and take care of what is rightfully yours." The moment was interrupted by the sound of a tractor approaching. It was old Joe, one of the few employees who hadn't abandoned the farm yet. "Miss Emily!" he shouted, getting off the tractor with surprising agility for his age. "You need to see this. There are people destroying the fences on the north side." Emily and Nathan exchanged quick glances before running in the indicated direction. When they arrived, they found 3 men wearing uniforms of a maintenance company, methodically removing the fences that delimited the property. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Emily advanced, her voice laden with indignation. One of the men, apparently the leader, showed an official document. "Territorial redemarcation order, ma'am. Apparently there was a historical error in the boundaries of this property." "This is ridiculous," Nathan intervened, examining the document. "These lands have been in Emily's family for generations." The man shrugged, an awkward smile on his face. "I'm sorry, these are orders from above. If you have any complaints, you can contact the legal department of Prescott Enterprises." Emily felt the blood boil in her veins. This land wasn't just a piece of ground. It was her history, her future, the inheritance of generations of hard work. Turning to Nathan, she saw in his eyes the same fire she felt inside. "Your father won't stop, will he?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. Nathan shook his head. "No, this is just the beginning. He's going to try to suffocate us slowly, cutting off every resource, blocking every exit. Then we need to be smarter," Emily declared, an iron determination in her voice. "You know his way of operating, you know the weaknesses of the system, and I know this land. I know the people here. Together we can find a way." Nathan observed her for a moment, admiring her strength. This woman, who had saved him from the river just days ago, was now willing to face one of the most powerful men in the country. And for the first time since he had fled, he felt that he had found not just a refuge but a purpose. "Together," he agreed, taking her hand. The touch was simple, but loaded with promise and determination. On the other side of the partially destroyed fence, the men continued their work, oblivious to the silent pact that had just been sealed. The battle for the future of the farm was just beginning. and neither of them knew exactly what destiny had in store. But one thing was certain: they wouldn't give up without a fight. The kitchen of Mrs. Thompson's house had turned into an improvised operations center. Maps, documents, and notes covered the solid wooden table, while Emily and Nathan worked tirelessly on a plan to protect not just the farm, but the entire region from the advances of the Prescott Empire. Here, Nathan pointed to a series of documents he had managed to recover. My father always uses the same pattern. First, he isolates the property, cutting off suppliers and support. Then he creates seemingly unrelated legal problems. Finally, he offers a solution that seems like the only possible way out. Emily studied the papers attentively, her eyebrows furrowed in concentration. But why such a rush now? This region never interested big businessmen before. It's because of this, Nathan said, unrolling a larger map. I discovered it in the main office archives. There are plans for a mega development project. It's not just the highway. They want to build an entire logistics complex. Shopping malls, hotels, distribution centers. And our land is exactly in the center of everything, he completed. Whoever controls this area will control the entire flow of goods in the region. Mrs. Thompson, who had remained silent until then, approached the table. But what about the other landowners? They need to know about this. Emily nodded, an idea beginning to form in her mind. Mr. Johnson, from the neighboring farm, has always been respected by everyone. If we can convince him, he can help us unite the other landowners, Nathan completed, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Together, they would have more strength to resist. The sound of footsteps on the porch interrupted the conversation. It was Sarah, Mr. Johnson's daughter, who came running, out of breath. "Emily, you need to come now," she exclaimed, her words coming out choppy due to her accelerated breathing. "Dad is having a meeting with some men from the city. They're offering to buy all the lands." Emily and Nathan exchanged worried looks. "Has your father made any decision yet?" Emily asked, already standing up. "Not yet, but—" Sarah hesitated, looking at Nathan with curiosity. One of them mentioned the name Prescott, said it would be better to close the deal now before things got complicated. Nathan felt his stomach churn. He knew this type of veiled threat. "Well, we need to go there." "No," Emily stopped him. "You can't show up. If they see you, they'll know you're here. I'll go." "Emily, it's dangerous," he argued, holding her hand. "You don't know these people like I do," she smiled, gently squeezing his fingers. "And they don't know this land and its people like I do. Trust me." The moment between them didn't go unnoticed by Sarah, who observed the scene with interest. Emily quickly let go of Nathan's hand, trying to ignore the warmth rising in her face. "Mrs. Thompson," Emily called, already walking to the door. "Can you call Father Michael? He's always had influence with everyone here. We need all the help we can get." "And me?" Nathan asked, clearly frustrated at not being able to do more. Emily stopped at the door, turning to him. "You have something more important to do. Those documents you hid, it's time to use them." Nathan understood immediately. The files he had stolen before fleeing contained more than just evidence of dubious negotiations. They revealed a pattern of manipulation and destruction that extended across the entire country. "Emily," he called before she left, "be careful. When my father wants something—" "I know," she interrupted him softly, "but he needs to learn that not everything is for sale. Some things are protected by something stronger than money." When Emily left with Sarah, Nathan turned his attention to the documents. As he organized the evidence, he couldn't help but think about how his life had changed in the last few weeks. For the first time, he was fighting for something bigger than himself, and it both scared and strengthened him at the same time. Mrs. Thompson, who was observing him while making the necessary calls, noticed the change in his demeanor. "You know, Nathan," she said, her voice laden with wisdom, "sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters." Nathan looked at the woman who had welcomed him without asking questions, then at the door through which Emily had left, and finally at the documents in his hands, his weapons against the empire his own father had built. "Mrs. Thompson," he responded with a sad smile, "I think for the first time in my life I'm not losing but finding something." The meeting at Mr. Johnson's house had the air of a silent battle. On one side of the dining table, 3 executives from Prescott Enterprises, dressed in impeccable suits, presented numbers and promises. On the other, rural landowners from the region, faces marked by the sun and calloused hands, listened with distrustful expressions. Emily observed everything from the door of the room next to Sarah. Her heart was racing, but her determination remained unshakable. When one of the executives began to talk about inevitable development and necessary progress, she couldn't contain herself anymore. "You call destroying the livelihood of entire families progress?" she asked, advancing. To the center of the room, all eyes turned to her. Or would progress be forcing people to sell their lands through blackmail and sabotage? The oldest executive, a gray-haired man named Richard Torres, adjusted his tie with a condescending smile. "Miss Emily, I presume. Your accusations are quite serious. Do you have any proof of what you're saying?" "Not yet," she responded, holding his gaze. "But I have something better. Knowledge. I know exactly what happened in other regions where Prescott Enterprises appeared with its generous proposals. Like in Oakville, where mysterious fires destroyed 3 farms before the owners decided to sell." A murmur ran through the room. Mr. Johnson, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward in his chair. "What is she talking about, Mr. Torres?" "Unfounded stories," Torres dismissed with a gesture. "What we offer is a unique opportunity. Think about the future of your children, the development we'll bring." "Development?" A new voice joined the discussion. It was Father Michael, who had just arrived. "Like the development you brought to Green Valley, where now there's an empty shopping mall in place of dozens of productive small properties?" Emily felt a wave of gratitude for the priest's presence. His arrival was exactly the reinforcement they needed. The religious man was known and respected by everyone, and his word carried weight. Torres began to show signs of irritation. "Father, with all due respect, you don't understand business." "No," the priest agreed, "but I understand people. And in recent months, I've seen families I've known for decades facing inexplicable problems. Suppliers canceling deliveries, banks revoking already approved loans, equipment mysteriously failing." Other landowners began to speak up, sharing similar stories. Emily observed the executive's expressions gradually change from disdain to concern. "Gentlemen," Torres tried to regain control, "our proposals are more than fair, but they're for a limited time. After that, well, we can't guarantee that the conditions will remain so favorable." "Is that a threat?" Mr. Johnson asked, slowly standing up. His voice, normally calm, had a steely tone. "It's a friendly warning," Torres responded, collecting his documents. "Think carefully. You have 48 hours to decide." When the executives left, a heavy silence fell over the room. Emily knew that this small victory was just the beginning. The response from the Prescott Empire would come, and it would be relentless. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Emily looked at the faces around her, people she had known since childhood, who had built their lives on this land. "We unite," she responded firmly. "It's our only chance." Father Michael nodded. "I can use the parish hall for meetings. We need to organize an association, present documents to the authorities. And we need to be prepared," Mr. Johnson completed. "They won't give up easily." Emily felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. She thought of Nathan, of the documents he kept, of the risk he had taken to expose the truth. She thought of her mother, who had fought so hard to keep the farm after her father's departure. She wouldn't let all of that be destroyed. "Emily," Sarah called her softly when the others began to disperse. "That guy who's staying at your house, and he's not who he says he is he?" Emily hesitated for a moment. "I can't talk about that, Sarah." "You don't need to," her friend responded with a small smile. "Just be careful. I've seen the way you look at him." Before Emily could respond, the sound of an engine caught everyone's attention. Through the window, they saw a line of trucks entering the main road that led to the farms. "It started," Emily murmured, her heart tightening. The war for the future of that land was just beginning, and she knew that the next few hours would be crucial. Taking her cell phone, she quickly typed a message to Nathan. "We're united, but they won't give up. Time to use those documents." The response came almost instantly. "Everything's ready." "But Emily, there's something you need to know, something I found in the archives about your father." The sun had already set when Emily finally returned home. She found Nathan on the porch, surrounded by papers and with a grave expression on his face. Her heart raced, partly from the anxiety of discovering what he had found about her father, partly from something else, something that had been growing between them in recent weeks. "What did you discover?" she asked without preamble, sitting down beside him. Nathan took a deep breath, organizing some documents. "Emily, before I show you this, I need you to understand something. Your father, he didn't abandon you like you think." Emily felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "What are you talking about?" "I found records in the company archives," Nathan explained, showing some sheets yellowed by time. "Your father, Robert Thompson, was one of the few who opposed Prescott Enterprises' expansion plans 5 years ago. He was organizing the small landowners, exactly as we're doing now." Emily's hands trembled as she took the documents. "But he just left. He left a letter saying he couldn't take farm life anymore." "That letter was fake," Nathan said softly. "My father, he offered your father a deal. Either he left the region and never came back, or Prescott Enterprises would destroy not just your farm, but everyone he was trying to protect." Hot tears began to roll down Emily's face. For 5 years, she had carried the hurt of abandonment, the feeling of not having been enough to make her father stay. Now she discovered that he had left precisely to protect them. "Why did he never tell us the truth?" she whispered. "Part of the deal," Nathan explained, his voice laden with guilt for his family's role in that story. "He couldn't reveal anything, or the consequences would be immediate." Mrs. Thompson, who had approached silently, let out a muffled sob. "My God, Robert, all this time." "There's more," Nathan continued, although clearly reluctant. "Your father didn't give up completely. He's been monitoring you from a distance through small gestures. That loan you miraculously got 2 years ago? The mysterious buyer who appeared when the crop was about to be lost? It was him, using different names, different companies." Emily stood up abruptly, walking to the porch railing. Her entire world was being redesigned. Every memory of the last 5 years gained a new perspective, a new meaning. "Where is he now?" she asked, without turning around. "In Ohio," Nathan answered, "working as an agricultural consultant under another name. He never stopped trying. To protect you, Emily. He just needed to do it from afar." A heavy silence fell over the porch. Mrs. Thompson had sat down, her hands trembling as she held an old portrait of Robert. Emily continued with her back turned, her shoulders tense with the weight of the revelations. "Emily," Nathan approached, cautiously. "I know it's a lot to process, but we need to use this information. Your father wasn't the first to face these tactics, but we can make him the last. The documents I have along with this story can expose the entire scheme," she completed, finally turning around. Her eyes, though teary, had a glint of determination. "And that's exactly what we're going to do." "Are you sure?" Nathan asked, surprised by her reaction. "This will create a huge scandal. My father, the company, your father took mine away from me for 5 years," Emily responded, her voice firm. "He destroyed families, dreams, entire lives. It's time someone stopped him." At that moment, something changed between them. They were no longer just allies in a fight against the Prescott Empire. They were two hearts wounded by the same hands, seeking not just justice, but redemption. "Emily," Mrs. Thompson called softly, "there's something you need to see." She stood up, walking to an old chest in the living room. From inside, she took out a worn shoebox. "Your father asked me to keep this, in case the truth ever came to light." The box contained dozens of newspaper clippings, photographs, notes, a meticulous record of all Prescott Enterprises' actions in the region over the years. Robert hadn't just left. He had left an arsenal of evidence for the right moment. "He knew," Emily murmured, leafing through the documents. "He knew that one day we would need this." Nathan observed the scene with a mixture of admiration and guilt. His family's company had caused so much suffering, destroyed so many lives, And now here he was, falling in love with the daughter of one of its victims. "Emily," he began, but was interrupted by the sound of engines approaching. Running to the window, they saw a line of trucks entering the property. Men began to get out, carrying equipment. They're not going to wait for the 48 hours, Emily realized, her heart racing. They're starting now. Nathan took out his phone. "I'm going to contact the press. It's time to use everything we have." "No," Emily stopped him, an idea forming in her mind. "I have a better plan. Call your mother." Sarah Prescott arrived at nightfall, her luxury car standing out from the simplicity of the dirt road. Unlike her husband, there was no ostentation in her presence, just a natural elegance that years of high society life hadn't managed to corrupt. When she got out of the vehicle, her eyes immediately found her son's, and for a moment, all the weight of years of silence and resignation seemed to collapse. "Nathan," she whispered, hugging him tightly. "My son." Emily observed the scene from the porch, noting the similarities between mother and son, not just in physical traits, but in the way they both carried their pain with silent dignity. Sarah turned to her, a gentle smile on her lips. "You must be Emily," she said, approaching. "Thank you for taking care of my son." "Mrs. Prescott," Emily began, but was interrupted by a gentle gesture. "Sarah, please, I think we already have enough problems with formalities, don't we?" Inside the house, Mrs. Thompson had prepared coffee, her traditional way of receiving visitors, no matter how extraordinary the situation. The four women and Nathan gathered around the kitchen table, while outside the sound of trucks and machines continued, as a constant reminder of the urgency they faced. "So," Sarah began, after hearing the whole story, "William has finally gone too far." "Mrs. Sarah," Emily corrected herself, "why did you want to come here? Nathan said you manage the charity wing of the Prescott Empire, but this is much more than a matter of charity." Sarah set her cup down delicately. "Because for 25 years, I silently observed, as my husband built his empire on the suffering of others. Because every time we inaugurated a new venture, I saw in the eyes of the displaced families the same pain I now see in yours. And mainly," she looked at Nathan, "because my son has finally found the courage I never had." "Mom," Nathan began. But Sarah raised her hand, asking for silence. "You're not the first to try to face William," she continued, "but you might be the first to succeed. You know why?" She opened her purse, taking out a folder. "Because I've spent the last 15 years documenting every dubious negotiation, every veiled threat, every life destroyed. As president of the charity wing, I have access to information that not even William knows exists." Emily took the folder with trembling hands. Inside, there were documents, photos, detailed records of all the questionable operations of the Prescott Empire. It was a complete dossier, meticulously organized. "Why didn't you use this before?" Mrs. Thompson asked, expressing the doubt that everyone shared. "Because it wasn't the right time," Sarah responded simply. "And because I needed to. Be sure there was someone willing to do the right thing with this information. When Nathan called me today telling me about you, Emily, about your father, about this community, I knew I had finally found that someone." The sound of an explosion interrupted the conversation. They ran to the porch, only to see a cloud of dust rising from the area where the storage silos were located. "It started," Nathan murmured. "They're going to destroy everything before we can act." "No," Emily responded firmly. "They won't." She turned to Sarah. "You have influence on the company's board, don't you?" Sarah nodded. "I'm the second largest shareholder after William. And can you call an extraordinary meeting?" "With 24 hours' notice, yes, but then that's what we're going to do," Emily declared, a plan forming in her mind. "Tomorrow, when all the board members are gathered, we'll present not just the evidence of illegal acts, but also an alternative." "What alternative?" Nathan asked, intrigued. "One your father won't be able to refuse," Emily responded, her eyes shining with determination. "Sarah, you said the charity wing has been growing in recent years, right?" "Yes. It's the only sector of the company that maintains a truly positive image." "And what if," Emily continued, "instead of destroying communities, the Prescott Empire started working with them? A pilot project of sustainable development, starting here. The landowners keep their lands, but in partnership with the company to create an agribusiness model that benefits everyone. Sarah smiled, understanding. A transformation of the company's image, showing that it's possible to grow without destroying. And the best part, Nathan completed excited, is that it would be much more profitable in the long run. My father has always been blind to this, but with the right numbers. He won't have a choice, Sarah concluded, especially with the threat of all this evidence going public. Mrs. Thompson, who had remained silent, suddenly let out a soft laugh. You know what's most ironic? William's entire plan to destroy our community ended up uniting not just the landowners, but his own family as well. Another explosion sounded in the distance, but this time no one ran to see. On the face of each person on that porch, there was a new expression: hope. We have a lot of work ahead of us, Emily said, taking the documents, and only one night to prepare everything. Sarah stood up, a new energy in her movements. Then we'd better get started. William always said I didn't understand business. It's time to show him how wrong he was. Nathan observed the two most important women in his life working together and felt for the first time that he had found not just his place in the world, but also his purpose. Emily took his hand, squeezing it gently, and in that touch there was more than support. There was a promise of future. The boardroom of Prescott Enterprises had never witnessed a morning like that one. The board members, accustomed to financial reports and market projections, found themselves facing a completely unexpected situation. On one side of the long mahogany table, William Prescott maintained his usual authoritarian posture. On the other, Sarah, Nathan, and, to everyone's surprise, Emily. This is absurd, William vociferated, slamming the table. How dare you bring a farmer to a board meeting? This farmer, Sarah responded with a calmness that only years of living with her husband could provide, is here to present a proposal that could change the future of our company. Emily, wearing her best clothes, still simple compared to the executive attire around her, remained firm. The night before, they had worked tirelessly preparing the presentation, gathering documents, building financial projections. Nathan, with his knowledge of the corporate world, had helped translate Emily's vision into a language the board could understand. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Emily began, her voice steadier than her racing heart suggested. I'm here today not just as a representative of my community, but as someone who believes there's a better path for all of us. For a full hour, she presented the Sustainable Development Project. She showed how the partnership between the Prescott Empire and local producers could create a new business model, more profitable and socially responsible. Nathan complemented with numbers and projections, while Sarah occasionally intervened, with information about the positive impact on the company's image. William observed everything with a mixture of anger and incredulity. When Emily finished, he stood up, his face red with fury. This is ridiculous! You really think you're going to change years of strategy with a fairy tale about sustainability? It was then that Sarah made her decisive move. With studied calm, she opened her folder and began distributing copies of documents to each board member. What is this? One of the oldest board members asked, adjusting his glasses to read. Years of records, Sarah answered. Every dubious negotiation, every threat, every life destroyed in the name of progress. Including, she made a significant pause, the case of Robert Thompson. William visibly paled. You wouldn't do this, Sarah, wouldn't I? She asked, arching an eyebrow. I spent 25 years being the perfect wife, William, smiling at parties, inaugurating charity works, pretending not to see what you were doing. But it's over. The board members leafed through the documents with increasingly worried expressions. The murmur in the room increased with each new page revealed. This could destroy the company, one of them muttered. Or, Nathan intervened, we can use this moment to transform it. The project Emily presented isn't just viable, it's the future. As long as we continue destroying communities, we'll always be seen as villains. But if we start working with them, the profits would be smaller, William tried to argue. In the short term, yes, Emily responded. But in 5 years, according to the projections Nathan prepared, the return would be 3 times greater, not to mention the value of positive image, something that no money can buy. The silence that followed was deafening. The board members exchanged glances, some whispering among themselves. William remained standing, his hands gripping the edge of the table tightly. "Let's put it to a vote," the chairman of the board finally declared. One by one, the board members began to vote. Emily held Nathan's hand under the table, both barely breathing. Sarah kept her eyes fixed on her husband, years of submission giving way to a long-repressed strength. When the last vote was tallied, the chairman cleared his throat. By majority decision, the board approves the implementation of the Sustainable Development Pilot Project in the Green Valley region. Furthermore, it recommends an immediate restructuring of the company's land acquisition practices. William let himself fall into his chair, defeated. Sarah stood up, walking over to him. "It's over, William," she said softly. "Not as you feared, with scandal and destruction, but with a chance for redemption. The choice is now yours. To be remembered as the man who almost destroyed the Prescott Empire, or as the one who led it into a new future." Emily observed the scene with a mix of emotions. She thought of her father, of how he had sacrificed everything to protect his community. Now somehow his sacrifice had paved the way for this transformation. Nathan hugged her, not caring about the looks from the board members. "We did it," he whispered in her ear. "No," she responded, smiling. "We've just begun." A week after the historic board meeting, the landscape of Green Valley began to change. Not through the destruction everyone feared, but through reconstruction. The trucks that once threatened to demolish now worked to repair the damage caused. The fences were rebuilt, the silos fixed, and a new energy hung in the air. Emily was on the house porch, observing the movement of people working on the farm, when Nathan arrived with news from the city. His face had a different expression, lighter, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "I just came from a meeting with my father," he said, sitting next to her. "You won't believe what happened." Emily turned to him, curious. "He finally accepted the changes." "More than that," Nathan smiled. "He wants to actively participate in the project. He said he spent the week studying success cases of sustainable development in other countries." "Emily, I've never seen him like this. It's as if something had awakened in him." "Your mother called me yesterday," Emily commented. "She said he's been sleeping in the office, surrounded by books and reports on family farming and cooperativism. I think discovering that his own wife spent years documenting his mistakes made him rethink a lot," Nathan reflected. "But there's more. He wants to meet your father." Emily felt her heart race. Since the revelation about the true reason for Robert's departure, she had tried to contact him but still hadn't gathered enough courage to make the call. "Sarah managed to locate him," Nathan continued softly. "He's on his way. He should arrive tomorrow." Silent tears began to roll down Emily's face. 5 years of absence, of unanswered questions, of harbored resentments, all about to find a resolution. "I'm afraid," she confessed in a whisper. What if he's not the man you remember?" Nathan completed, taking her hand. "What if time and distance have changed everything? Emily, look at me and my father. Sometimes we need to completely lose ourselves to find a new way back." Mrs. Thompson appeared at the kitchen door, wiping her hands on her apron. "There's one more thing you need to know," she said, her voice choked. "Father Michael just called. The Rural Landowners Association was officially registered today, and they want you to be the president, Emily." "Me?" Emily asked, surprised. "But there are much more experienced people." "No one with your vision," a deep voice interrupted. William Prescott was standing at the bottom of the porch stairs, without his usual suit, wearing a simple shirt and dress pants. "Excuse the intrusion. I needed to see this with my own eyes." Nathan instinctively stood up, placing himself next to Emily. But there was something different in his father's demeanor, a humility that had never been there before. "Miss Emily," William began, visibly uncomfortable, "I spent 30 years building an empire the wrong way. I destroyed lives, separated families, all in the name of progress. But you showed me there's a better way. What you proposed isn't just a sustainability project. It's a completely new model of doing business. He took a few steps forward, stopping at a respectful distance. I came to ask not just for forgiveness, but for a chance to be part of this reconstruction, not as an owner or controller, but as a partner. Emily looked at Nathan, then at her mother, seeking guidance. In the eyes of both, she found the same silent advice. Sometimes forgiveness is the first step towards true change. You've already started to be part of it, she finally responded, the moment you decided to listen instead of impose. William nodded, a shy and genuine smile appearing on his face. Sarah, your mother. She showed me something I had forgotten a long time ago. That true legacy isn't in the buildings we construct or the money we accumulate, but in the lives we touch. The sound of another car approaching caught everyone's attention. On the dirt road, an old dusty pickup truck was slowly approaching. "Dad," Emily whispered, instantly recognizing the vehicle. Nathan squeezed her hand, transmitting strength. Mrs. Thompson brought her hands to her chest, tears already flowing freely. And William Prescott, the man who had once separated that family, took a step back, respecting the moment that was about to happen. The pickup truck stopped, and Robert Thompson got out, his hair grayer than Emily remembered, but his eyes exactly as in her memories. For a moment no one moved, as if time itself had frozen to allow that reunion to happen at its own pace. The sun was rising over Green Valley, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. Emily was sitting in the old rocking chair on the porch, watching the first workers arrive at the farm. 6 months had passed since her father's return, and each day brought new changes, new challenges, and new joys. Robert had readapted to farm life as if he had never left. His hands, which had never really forgotten work with the land, now coordinated the Sustainable Development Pilot Project in partnership with the Prescott Empire. The wisdom he had acquired during his years of forced exile proved invaluable for the transformation they were carrying out. Thinking about life, Nathan's voice pulled her from her reverie. He approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Remembering," she responded, accepting one of the cups. "How it all began, with a man being carried by the river." Nathan smiled, sitting next to her. "The best fall of my life." The sound of laughter and lively conversations came from the kitchen, where Mrs. Thompson, Sarah, and Robert were preparing breakfast. It was Sunday, and it had become a tradition for the families to gather for the first meal of the day. "I still wonder sometimes," Emily reflected, "if all this is real. The association growing, other communities wanting to implement the same. A model your father really changing." William Prescott, the feared businessman, now giving lectures on sustainable development, Nathan completed with a smile. Who would have thought? Indeed, William's transformation had surprised everyone. After that first step of humility, he dove headfirst into the project. His business experience, combined with the humanized vision that Emily and Robert brought, was creating something truly revolutionary. "Another article about the project came out," Nathan commented, showing his tablet. "Green Valley is becoming a national reference in sustainable rural development." Emily read the headline with pride. The photo showed local farmers alongside Prescott Enterprises executives, all smiling, all equal in their determination to build something new. "You know what's most incredible?" she asked, returning the tablet. "How love can change everything. My father's love for our family, which made him sacrifice everything to protect us. Your mother's love, which made her document years of injustices, waiting for the right moment. And..." She hesitated, blushing slightly. "And our love," Nathan completed softly, "which gave us courage to face all of this." From the kitchen came Mrs. Thompson's call, announcing that breakfast was ready. Emily and Nathan stood up, but before entering they paused for a moment, observing the landscape stretching out before them. The farm, green and prosperous, was now much more than a cultivation field. It was a symbol of transformation. "I love you," Nathan said simply, as if stating a universal truth. Emily smiled, remembering that girl who once met a boy from the big city who dreamed of escaping his destiny. "I love you too," she responded. "And look, you didn't need to run away from your destiny. You just needed to find the right destiny." Inside the house, the families once divided by ambition and power now gathered in harmony. William and Robert animatedly discussed new sustainable farming techniques. Sarah and Mrs. Thompson exchanged recipes and stories like old friends. The aroma of fresh coffee and homemade bread filled the air, mixing with laughter and conversations. Emily and Nathan entered hand in hand, taking their places at the table. Sunday breakfast had become more than just a meal. It was a weekly celebration of everything they had achieved, of all the barriers they had torn down. "So," Robert began, looking lovingly at his daughter, "I heard you have an announcement to make." Emily and Nathan exchanged knowing looks. The delicate ring on Emily's finger shone under the sunlight coming through the window. "Actually, we do," Nathan responded, squeezing Emily's hand, "but I think everyone already knows what it is." The expressions of joy around the table confirmed. Everyone had already noticed that the love born amidst turbulence had blossomed into something deep and true. The wedding would be just the formalization of a union that was already written between the lines of their story. "To family," William raised his cup in an improvised toast. "Not the one we're born into, but the one we choose to build." "To family," everyone responded in unison. Outside, the sun continued its ascent in the sky, promising another day of work and achievements in Green Valley. The farm that was almost destroyed had now become the cradle of a new form of progress, one that left no one behind. Emily looked around the table, her heart overflowing with gratitude. The river that once brought Nathan to her continued flowing, its waters now cleaner and more preserved. It was a perfect metaphor for their story. Just like the river waters, life followed its course, sometimes turbulent, sometimes serene, but always carrying with it the promise of new beginnings.